Welcome everybody to Unraveling the Unexplained. My name is Kat and I am a longtime astral traveler and spirit consultant. This is my brother John, a longtime fan of the paranormal.
Hello. I like to show my sister various videos about the weird and unexplained and get her take on things since she has plenty of experience with the weird and unexplained.
He has picked a video for me to take a look at. I'm not sure what he's picked, but we are going to find out right now. Let's get into it.
Bromley is a large town in southeast Greater London. Originally part of Kent, it became a chartered market town in 1158. But few have heard of the Bromley poltergeist. This case, with its bizarre location, its persistence, and its terrifying actions, is arguably one of the strangest poltergeist cases documented to this day. 3 elderly men were at the centre of the events and were subjected to terrifying attacks, so severe the Society for Psychical Research were called in to investigate. The Grove Park allotments, and in particular the 2 sheds owned by the Kentish Garden Guild, that operated as a small shop for allotment owners, might seem an unusual location for a poltergeist, and you'd be right, but these curious events happened over a period of 2 years in the early 1970s. Alfred Taylor was a 78-year-old man who, like many, enjoyed an active retirement at the allotment. And on Sunday mornings, Taylor and his friends, Tony Elms and Clifford Jewis, opened their shop in the iron-roofed shed and would sell their items to fellow allotment owners. This had been commonplace for years, and the small enterprise was very popular. But on one quiet Sunday, in April 1973, this all changed. The men were chatting in the shed when some powder stored in a bag suddenly hit the ceiling. Clifford Jewis's first thought was that some kids were up to no good. Perhaps they were the victims of some sort of prank. But then, and seemingly of its own accord, a small pewter jug on a shelf flew across the shed, narrowly missing Jewis's face. And the jug was picked up and placed in a box with a lid. Within minutes, the jug was back on the floor in front of them, but the lid remained in place on the box. The men looked at each other and began to feel uneasy. For the next few weeks, a series of unexplainable events plagued the men, particularly Elms and Taylor. From a large bin of Growmore came a fountain of pellets that struck the ceiling and showered onto customers, scaring many of them senseless. A 7-pound weight flew off a set of scales and struck Alf Taylor on the shoulder. The men were completely puzzled and still believed they were the victims of a hoax, but when Taylor was struck on the head by an entire box of gardening utensils and needed medical help, it all felt rather sinister. Objects appeared to have a life of their own. Rumours began to circulate, and customers became too afraid to visit. Bottles of weed killer and slug pellets were unscrewed and tipped all over the floor. Heavy bottles of liquid maxicrop fell like dominoes, their contents pouring out in front of the men. These incidents were proving to be extremely expensive, and more than 45 kilos of fertiliser pellets were strewn onto the floor and saturated by the tipped liquid, making them unusable. But it seemed this entity wasn't finished and began to operate outside of the shed. Money was taken from one of their cars, and the coins rained down on the men in the shed with alarming force. Tony Elms, about to drink a coffee he made, discovered the coffee had been tipped out and replaced with fertiliser. The building would frequently shake. A customer was struck by a garden fork thrown in the style of a javelin, and another customer was struck by a 7-pound bag of fertiliser.
Thoughts so far?
Well, I mean, something is definitely trying to get somebody's attention. And,
Yeah, I mean, it is a little unusual because it's happening kind of like this garden shed area, very specifically around it. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, it's not like, and again, like, I don't know how much the video is going to go into the history of the area or anything. A shed is pretty much a shed, so it doesn't seem, I personally, it doesn't feel like it's associated with the building or anything based on what I can see so far. There are energies out there that can gain enough momentum, enough force to be able to have an impact in the physical world. Usually things start off fairly innocuous, like just knocking something over or trying to get attention.
Which is kind of how this started.
Yeah, it seems like it escalated into something a little more serious fairly quickly, and I don't know what the initial responses were. I mean, it seems like they weren't paying attention, like they thought it was just some prank or some kids and weren't interacting with it or thinking it was anything strange. So it's possible it just the situation escalated. But
Would that be normal? You would think that if something's ignored like that, it's going to escalate, or is it?
no, not typically. So something's really trying to get their attention. Odd. We can watch a little bit more of it and get a little bit more information on the situation. Let's see if they give some more information on it.
All right.
On one occasion, the men, shaken and alarmed by the moving objects, closed the shop well before the usual time of 1 o'clock. George Bentley, a regular customer and a friend, quoted, "One time some money disappeared, and the next thing I knew, a 10-pence coin fell into a cup of tea I was drinking. Another time, I went to the shed to buy a £7 bag of Growmore. I asked for it and saw it lift off the shelf, float across and burst open on the counter. There were some right queer goings on, and a lot of us saw them." Elms and Taylor knew something had to be done, but what? It was Elms who approached a local church for advice, and subsequently he carried out a DIY exorcism on a Friday night, alone in the dark, in one of the sheds.
Do-it-yourself exorcism.
Don't try to do a do-it-yourself exorcism. Okay, please.
Is there a way to legitimately do a kind of exorcism style thing, though?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a way to handle the situation, and exorcism isn't it. Imagine you're non-corporeal and nobody can see you. And you're not sure why you're stuck there and you don't know what's going on, but people treat you like you're evil and you don't know why. But after a long period of time, maybe you start to believe it. But nobody's listening to you and you don't know what's happening, but everybody thinks you're evil. And suddenly you've got the Holy Bible in the name of Jesus Christ and I banish you to hell, and this is a scary situation. There's a reason why exorcisms get so dramatic and violent. It's scary. Like,
You're putting a bunch of scary energy into something that's already kind of gaining momentum in that regard.
right, exactly. You're already scared and freaked out, and then you do something like this, and it makes the situation even more frightening. If you were an entity, would you want to be banished to hell? Sure, sounds like a good vacation.
The thing is when it comes to an entity, I don't know how intelligent they are, how much capacity they have to kind of grasp what's happening. Like, if a bunch of people start waving a book around and shouting passages out of it, if I were an entity, it would depend, like, do I even notice or care what they're doing?
Yeah, I mean, obviously they're able to interact.
Onlookers heard tremendous banging sounds and feared the walls of the structure could collapse at any moment. The heavy door swung open 9 times, and eventually Elms emerged with a nasty cut on his head and an injured hand that became terribly bruised for weeks. On the next Saturday evening, the men returned to the shed to prepare for the following morning's sales. They unlocked the door to the shed and found it in complete chaos. The interior looked as if it had been hit by a bomb. The goods were off the shelves, some were airborne and circling the men by an unseen force. The sign of the cross appeared painted on and scratched into most exposed surfaces: the counter, the walls, the plastic tubs and the wooden benches. 2 5'6" planks used to barricade the shed securely had disappeared and were found the following day outside of the shed in the shape of a cross. Even the drawing pins on the community notice board were arranged in the shape of a cross. Could this be the poltergeist consciously mocking the gentleman and Tony Elm's attempt to exorcise the spirit? The police were called, but there was no evidence of a forced entry. The malevolent spirit seemed to follow the men at times. Alfred Taylor suffered various attacks in his own home in front of family members, including being slapped across the face. He was pushed over in the Bromley council offices. The energy of this force seemed to be escalating rather than subsiding.
Yeah.
After suffering at the hands of the poltergeist for 6 months, the men were desperate for help. Alf Taylor rang the Society for Psychical Research, pleading for help, and the chairman, Manfred Cassera, and his wife and fellow researcher, Pauline Runnels, agreed to meet with Taylor at his home in Downham and accepted the offer to visit the site. What they witnessed assured them that this was not a hoax, and the men were not making things up. After all, these dreadful events were losing them money. The researchers investigated the site on 2 occasions. The first was in October 1973, where both Cassera and Runnels witnessed the spirit in full force. They watched as security bolts from a window disappeared and were found in a car outside. In front of their eyes, they witnessed Tony Elms being attacked by a saw that ran down his back and ripped his shirt. They experienced frantic banging on the walls of the shed that was so extreme they thought their lives were in danger. The number 1659 mysteriously appeared on a wooden panel in front of their eyes. Initially they thought it was written in blood, but it was actually maxicrop. Other writing and scribbles became visible, large question marks, various letters from the English alphabet, and strangely, the name of one of Taylor's dead friends, who had no connection with the allotment, appeared on a wall. The second visit took place in June 1974, and on this occasion, as they opened the door to the shed, a human face was visible on the counter, constructed like a mosaic from various pellets and chemicals in the shed.
So I would say this is an intelligent, surely understands an exorcism for sure.
I'm curious about the date, like the 1659 year that was put down. Like, did anybody bother to research, like, if anything happened in that area in that
maybe,
year?
but it's kind of irrelevant.
I don't know.
I
It
mean,
seems very specific.
people die in 1659. People die in every year. This one just needs help figuring out how to cross over and get to where they need to go. They're stuck for whatever
So you think
reason.
it's a person that died and not necessarily an other entity visiting?
No, I wouldn't call this extra dimensional. Most of these types of occurrences, like poltergeist activity, are either former humans that have transitioned, or they're fragment personalities that get. I'll explain fragment personalities here in a minute, but this situation feels like a formerly human. So, and they're just lost and angry and alone and have been treated poorly by everyone they've tried to communicate with. It can be very confusing and frustrating.
Right.
White sulfite was used to create a skull, and the eyes, nose and mouth were formed using brown maxicrop. The men were haunted by this image, but all agreed that it had been created with great skill and precision. The pensioners all felt that they lacked dexterity and patience to create something so intricate. By the end of the day, the face simply disintegrated and faded away. The researchers witnessed objects moving by their own accord. A metal watering can flew across the shed. A large canister of ant killer fell off a shelf and was put back 3 times. Wooden planks were pushed over, and the impression of a child's hand in white powder appeared above a shelf and then morphed into a face. A brass paperweight engraved with the letters MN appeared on the floor, but none of the men had ever seen it before, and nobody knew what MN could symbolise. Car keys disappeared from Elms's coat pocket and were found in the researcher's bag. Taylor's thermos flask vanished and reappeared in a carrier bag on the back of Jewis's motorbike. £4 of petty cash disappeared from a locked cash box. A garden fork flew across the shed again, and more fertiliser appeared, this time in the thermos flask instead of coffee. Elms was pushed in the back so hard he hurt his neck and collided into Cassera, who had a bulb thrown at him with great force. Neither of the researchers had ever witnessed such bizarre activity firsthand. But only a few months later, all the activity ceased, just as quickly as it began.
Is that normal?
Fellow
Can be.
gardener George Bentley said it all stopped after the work on a new block of garages was finished. Nobody knows why the activity stopped so suddenly, or why it began in the first place, and why did the activity focus so much on Tony Elms, a man in his 70s, making the most of his retirement? Was there something in his subconscious or personality, some sort of hidden anger or bitter resentment? Tony Elms didn't think so. This wicked, insanely childlike entity distressed and disturbed all of the men, who fortunately were able to return to the quiet enjoyment of their allotment until the end of their days. I thought this was a really interesting.
It is interesting. And it is very childlike. It's probably why it's such a
Active force.
It's probably why it's such an active case, is it does seem like it's a childish temper tantrum and somebody throwing it's a personality throwing a fit. And I'm not sure if she said this guy Tony, right, that the spirit wrote out the name of one of his friends that had passed. So there's a connection there to this guy through another spirit on the other side, which is why a lot of the activity surrounds him. It's a childlike spirit trying to get the attention of this guy for whatever.
And you think that just after a while it gave up, or?
No, it probably found a way to cross over and do what it needed to do. The whole process of transition from what is usually called death is a very supported activity from the other side. So the only reason that the spirit of a child, or a spirit of anybody for that matter, wouldn't just cross over normally is if for whatever reason that particular person, that particular spirit is being particularly stubborn about it for whatever reason. They don't know that they're dead. They can't realize what happened. They're not processing the situation well. Especially for children, it can be sudden and difficult to understand, because when you're that young, you've never really contemplated mortality or anything. So if there was confusion on the part of a young one that passed, it's possible that it ended up stuck and just not knowing what to do, and eventually gaining enough momentum, enough energy for itself to be able to throw a fit at humans.
Right.
Maybe it takes a long period of time to gain back enough momentum to move physical objects, enough energy momentum to move things around. This sounds like a child throwing a fit because it's lost and scared and needing help.
In case with so many awful incidents, and it's really not a haunting that's terribly well known. Unlike the Enfield poltergeist, for example, in the late 1970s, that was covered extensively in the press, in the Mirror newspaper in particular, I don't think I found any press coverage of this haunting at all. I did try and look into the land, and I did discover that Grove Park allotments are part of what was an 18th century garden belonging to a physician called Dr. John Lettsome. And he was an important physician and philanthropist who had a house here for about 20 years, but it was demolished in 1800. And what stood there before, I don't know. Another component with this story is that you've got the sheer number of witnesses. There's the three men, of course, Tony Elms, Alfred Taylor and Clifford Jewis. Then there's the witness George Bentley, and of course the two researchers who had to publish their findings for the Society of Psychical Research, which they did. Cassera and co-investigator Pauline Runnels both said that there was no evidence of deception or hoax in their published research. These are just my thoughts, and I'd love to know what you think about this case. If it isn't an actual poltergeist, what could it actually be? I suppose some people would say it's a hoax. Some people could say it's hallucinations. Maybe it's seismic activity, or if there's water turbulence under the property. I did wonder if any of the men were on medicines. And if you've got a person who has a lot of medicines to take and they've taken them incorrectly, or maybe it's a side effect, could they have hallucinations or violent behaviour as a result? These are just ideas, really.
All three of them at the same time?
I did contact the Society for Psychical Research by email about this case, and I asked if it was possible to see any notes from the investigations or any documents relating to the case, that sort of thing. And within hours, I got a very nice email back from the secretary, who wrote that he will look into it when he goes back into the office.
I like somebody who does their full-on research, like reach out,
Does some
ask for the
follow-up.
ask for the actual research notes. We're gonna
Like I said, I didn't even know there were organizations out there like that you could ask about cases like this.
Yeah, they pop up in various places. That's interesting. We're gonna have to find out who this channel is and
Oh yeah, she's got a lot of different videos
subscribe.
heavily focused on ghosts.
I like somebody who does their due diligence like that. That's good.
I really hope that you enjoyed this video, and there's loads more to come, including more poltergeist cases. Please feel free to comment below as to what you think happened at Bromley. Is it a poltergeist? Do you think it's something else? I'd be fascinated to hear your opinions. Take care, guys, and I'll see you on the next video. Please remember to like and subscribe.
We will like and subscribe.
Indeed.
And we will also, like I said, link the channel in the description for you guys to go check that out. Do like somebody who does their research. That's good. Yeah, my impression, this feels like a full personality that was having difficulty crossing over and threw a fit.
And you think it's also possible that this personality had some sort of tie to that specific guy?
It's possible that, yeah, that energetically it ended up getting wound up or having more energy in the situation because of a connection to that guy and another spirit that was on the other side. Energy connections work that way. Like, let's say that soul family wise, for whatever reason, the gentleman's friend who passed is in the same family tree as this other spirit energetically. That's a boost. And then they recognize the person, what was his name?
Todd something.
Todd something comes into the picture, and suddenly there's a connection. The spirit that's trapped has an odd familiarity or a recognition of this Todd person through a connection they have on the other side, and it escalates the situation.
All right, that makes sense.
Which is actually excellent. It sounds like the spirit was actually able to gain enough momentum and get the situation sorted and cross over.
Just in the meantime, everybody else has to deal with flying fertilizer and saws and forks.
Honestly, it's probably might have gone differently if the situation had been handled a little bit differently.
What would be the appropriate way to handle that situation?
Well, if it was me in that situation, I would de-escalate the energy as swiftly as possible and encourage them to cross over. It's okay. There's nothing wrong.
So what you would do is
use your feelings. You can cross over.
So what you do is like you actually try talking to them, and
yeah, from this side, definitely. If I'm working with entities on the other side, like let's say I'm astral projecting, I'm out and I'm working with a spirit on the other side, I have a lot more control over the situation. So in a non-physical energy space, I can help craft a scenario. I can create, what people see, like the long hallway, we walk down towards the light. come with me into the garden. Let's walk this way. You know,
Right.
we can kind of create scenario on the other side. We can kind of create energetic scenarios to help out.
But for people that can't do that,
yeah, from this side, you're keep the energy as chill as possible. I know it's a lot of people get scared, and so they start adding scared or angry energy to the situation, which is completely understandable. If you've got somebody throwing stuff at you and upsetting your customers, obviously you're going to be scared and angry. It's completely understandable. But as much as possible, watch your psychic energy that you're adding to this situation, because it will escalate. Like they rightly pointed out, these types of scenarios have an escalation that occurs the more the humans that are involved add more fear, anger, energy to the situation, and then, throw an exorcism on top of it. You're adding a lot of negative energy to this situation in a case where this spirit just needed help figuring out what to do and how to cross over.
all right.
I like that. I mean, there was some intelligent attempts at communication happening here.
Numbers,
There was
faces,
numbers,
names.
faces, you know what I mean? Dates, art happening.
As if the spirit was trying to identify itself to the person.
Right. There was some intelligence, some real effort at communication happening outside of just chucking stuff around, and you don't often get that. So I get the feeling this is I don't I poltergeist seems like a scary, nasty term to me. This feels like it was a human spirit that was trapped and scared and trying to cross over and throwing a fit, wanting to get attention, probably because the gentleman who came into the shed was recognized energetically, and it exacerbated the situation.
All right. Makes sense to me.
Sound fair? That's my hot take on it anyway. You guys feel free to drop a comment. Let me know what you think. If you think I'm crazy, if you think I'm onto something, let me know. Um, like I said, we will link the video in the description. Please check them out. If you want to send us your unexplained experiences, you can do that at unravelmyexperience@gmail.com. We'd love to hear them, and we hope to be able to feature them on the channel at some point. And that's all I got for now. You got anything?
Oh, you folks have a lovely evening.
Thanks for joining us. See you later.